Hello, this is Justin Kramer, and this is my short walkthrough on Simplify 3D. So when I first started 3D printing, I would use the print preparation software that kind of came free with the 3D printer, and that works pretty good. But somebody turned me on to Simplify 3D, which is a not too expensive alternative version of print preparation software. What it does is it generates a G-code file from a 3D Stl file that you can then load onto a 3D printer and print. So it's what you use to generate your support material and give instructions to the printer on how to behave. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of show you how I use it, some of the features that I use quite a bit that I find to be helpful. So when you install the software for the first time, it's going to prompt you to set up a printer. You can redo that through the Help Configuration Assistant area and select a different printer, but mine is already set to the Prusa. The next step is to import an Stl file. I've imported this severely degenerative lumbar spine model that I use to teach residents how to do lumbar punctures on people with severe degenerative disease. You may want to move your model around a little bit. These buttons up here allow you to do that. This lets you translate back and forth and up. You'll notice I have this little widget here. That displays all the time for me because I went to Tools, Options, Always Show Full 3D Transform Gizmo. You can also translate. Now you'll notice that it's not very intuitive what way it's going to, it's going to deform in one dimension if you translate that way. So this wouldn't be a self-respecting 3D software if there weren't some hidden features. If you double click on a model, it brings up a menu that allows you to have more granular control over your translation, your scaling, and your rotation. The scaling works well. The rotation you can use to rotate in the X and Y axis. If you're going to be moving things up and down or rotating much, I would probably do that in CAD and then import it into Simplify 3D. To my knowledge, Simplify 3D doesn't yet have a lay flat on build plate option. So that's the only thing that doesn't work very well. Once you have your model positioned the way you want it to be, the next step is to add support structures. Now that doesn't happen automatically, but it almost happens automatically. So if you click this button down here called Customize Support Structures, you'll see a support generation window. And I haven't really changed these settings very much, but you can. So you can have finer support structures by changing the support pillar resolution, and you can test your printer to see how much of an overhang angle it can handle. One of the big advantages I have with Simplify 3D is the fact that it prints such fine support structures. Out of the box, a lot of the 3D printing software prints really thick and tough support structures that I've cut my fingers up trying to break off. With Simplify 3D, it just falls off pretty easily and it works well. But I haven't played much with the 4mm resolution. So just at the default settings, 4mm and 45 degrees, you can click Generate Automatic Support, and you can see that here's a representation of what your support structures are going to look like. This isn't exactly how it's going to look when it's printed, but it gives you a good idea of what it's going to look like. So the other cool thing is that you can actually go in and manually add supports. So maybe I don't believe that it's going to make this lip here. Well, I can just automatically add some support there if I want to. You can also play with things a little bit, test it out. If you bump the overhang angle down, that's a more aggressive support, and it's more likely to succeed in printing, but you're going to have more support to break off. Let's bump it up to 60 degrees and see what happens there. So you can see that's a lot less support structure. That would be pushing it a little bit. But that's kind of the point is, say you were going to print out 20 of these models. Well, you may want to figure out the best way to print it so that you can use the minimum amount of support material that'll work. So that's support material. The next thing you'll do in getting your model ready to print is edit process settings. Now if it comes up and it only shows this, click Show Advanced, and you're going to want to show Advanced. And you'll notice here there's a process name. The process is down here. I have a Prusa i3 and that's selected. I'm going to print in PLA with a medium print quality. And all of that just works pretty well out of the box once you set up your printer, which setting up just requires selecting what your printer is. Then you can specify your infill percentage. That's going to determine how thickly the infill to the inner portion of your model is. 20% seems to work pretty well for me. Some other features that I like, a raft is a kind of a thick first layer that kind of helps your model adhere to the build plate. You can print that if you like. Generate support is something that's going to have to be clicked. We generated the support structures, but you have to click that in the process settings as well to make sure the support gets printed. We don't need a skirt or a brim. That's just a single layer around the first layer. If you're printing a raft, you don't really need that. Generate support material is already checked. You can play with your temperatures if you like, but generally the default for the material works fine for me. And then you can also play with your speeds. Now you're going to notice here 2400 milliliters per minute. That may not make a lot of sense to you. It didn't to me. So in Tools Options, you can change it to millimeters per second. And I think that's a little more what we're used to thinking about. So 40 millimeters per second. You can look at what your printer can handle and bump that up. And you can also make it slow down or speed up for certain parts. So, you know, if your X or Y axis is just moving over thin air from one point to another, you can make that move faster. If you're printing support material, you can make it go a little slower so it's less likely to fail in support material. But the granularity that you're able to specify different options is really beneficial. So those are the main options that I tend to tweak. When you're ready, then, you click Prepare to Print. Okay, so it's detected that I've generated support material, but I didn't say to enable support generation. I thought I did, but I will click Yes. And this takes just a bit. Okay, so now we're in preview mode, and this is one of my favorite parts about Simplify 3D. So you may not pay much attention to this at first. If you just wanted to start printing this right away, you could just say Save Toolpath to Disk and save a G-code file to wherever it needs to go. But let's say your print fails, and it fails at a certain point. This allows you to go back and see exactly what the instructions are to the printer and how it's going to print. So I was running into a problem with this lumbar spine model where it kept failing on the first layer. It would print out the raft, and then it would be printing, and it would string out and gum up and not print right. And so I went in and looked at it layer by layer, and this is what I found. So on layer 1, this is what it was printing. And it was printing just a very thin layer of bone here, okay? And then if I go up to layer 2, I see it's printing a full base. So it's printing this over midair, and of course it didn't adhere to the build plate because it wasn't being instructed to. So when I went back and looked at the model, I discovered that it actually wasn't perfectly flat along the surface from my segmentation. So what I did was I went in and did a plane cut and made the model perfectly flat. So if we remove that, I'll bring in my trimmed model. Now let's look at the process settings on this. Okay, so here's the preview mode for the model that I did a plane cut of on the base to make the base perfectly flat. Now let's see if it'll make more sense the way this prints. So the first layer has, a complete layer along the bottom, and the second layer just builds on that. So there's nowhere that it's going to be trying to print over thin air, and this should print just fine. So it took what would have been a really frustrating problem in a piece of software that didn't have this option and made it something I was able to solve and successfully print a model. So again, once you're ready to print this, just click Save Toolpath to Disk, and that will let you save a G-code file to your SD card and be ready to print. So That concludes this video. Those are some of my favorite features of Simplify 3D that have made it easier for me to print and troubleshoot and break off support material.